I'm Russell Lissau, and I'm in the garden.
Let's explore creative minds at the panel garden. See what blooms, see what we find at the panel garden. Comics, cartoons, from old and new, nerdy paints, writers, editors, and art. Picking all their minds apart, with evil web as adorable as it gets.
Hi, Russell. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. So your writing career has just been everywhere. You've written Strawberry Shortcake. You've written Batman. You've got some creator-owned titles. Was there ever a moment where you consciously decided, hey, I want to write comics?
You know, I have been, I should say, a comic book reader regularly since I was about 9 or 10 years old. I loved going to the comic book store and picking them up. Biking, when I lived in Florida, biking the 3 miles with my friend Cliff to the nearest comic book store, getting our titles and biking back and reading them. I've always loved comics and loved superheroes, but I didn't want to become a comic book writer until very late in my life. I'm 50 now, and it wasn't until my mid-30s, early to mid-30s, where I thought, boy, I could do this. And what it was that inspired me was something that happened in my day job. My day job, I'm a newspaper reporter in suburban Chicago. And this is going to date me a little bit, I was looking at film negatives through a loop in over a light table, back when there was actual film. That's how long ago this was. and I was working with a photographer, and he was looking at negatives, and I was looking at negatives for images to go with a story that I was writing. And I flashed on the idea of a photojournalist doing exactly what we were doing, and discovering that he had taken pictures of Clark Kent turning into Superman. And I thought that would make a great comic book. And it really bounced around in my head for a while. And by that time, I had done a lot of writing about comics, both for the newspaper I worked for, the Daily Herald, but also for the Baltimore Sun, for the Miami Herald, for Wizard magazine. I was a regular contributor to Wizard for a number of years, to Cinefantastique magazine. I'd done a lot of journalism about comics. And I got to know people in the industry pretty well, and I approached one of them, Jeff Loeb, and asked him, I've got an idea that I think would make a pretty good comic. What do you think of this? And I sent him a 1-paragraph pitch, and he thought it was a great idea. He said, I don't think anyone's ever done that. I think you nailed the pitch on your first try. Let me introduce you to my editor. And he did. And I had a meeting with then DC Comics editor Eddie Berganza, and it was at a Wizard World Chicago. And it happened to be the same day that DC announced that Brian Azzarello and Jim Lee were doing a year-long run on Superman. The very same day. And Eddie said, well, we don't need anybody to do Superman right now. What else can you do? And I said, well, I can write Batman, which was completely, I mean, as much as I love Batman and I've always been a Batman fan, I had not planned to write any Batman stories. But if he's asking, I said, well, I can write Batman. And I started pitching Batman stories. And eventually they hired me to write my first Batman story, which was the annual that came out in 2005, Batman Allies Secret Files and Origins 2005. And that story led to other work at DC and eventually led to what is now, let me do the math on it, a 16-year career. Is that possible? A 16-year career writing comics.
That's incredible.
Thank you.
Comics is all about collaboration, just as a medium. It's a lot of different people with different ideas. What makes a collaboration an effective one?
Well, that's a great question. I am lucky, absolutely lucky, to have worked with some amazing collaborators. Really incredible guys. Marvin Mann, Sean Richardson, Mark Stegbauer, Brad Walker, Jimmy Palmati. It's a long, long list. Christine Larson. Really, really talented pencilers, inkers, colorists, letterers. Really talented people. What makes, and I shouldn't leave out Christopher Jones either, who was my artist on 5 of the 6 Batman Strike stories that I had published. What makes a collaboration an effective one, I think that was your question, is communication. The best stories that I've produced and the best relationships that I've had with my partners have been ones with open lines of communication, with suggestions, with notes going back and forth, where there's emails going back and forth, and now Facebook messages is how I talk with most of my creative partners, where we're bouncing ideas off of each other and the ideas are flowing, as opposed to I've written a script, I've moved it to the artist, and we never talk. Those are not healthy relationships by any means, and to me, they're not good partnerships. That's like, here, pencil monkey, draw this, and I don't want to talk to you. And comics, to me, like you mentioned, are very, very collaborative, and that collaboration is special. You don't get that collaboration in novel writing. You don't get the collaboration in writing for television or writing for the stage. But boy, to turn a script into a comic book, you need collaborators and you need partners. And the only way to create a good product is really to communicate.
Do you have a ritual that you go through to get in the zone for writing?
To get in the zone, that's a really good question. I've got to think about that, and I've got to think about my writing process. It's changed. I used to put on music. I used to put on music that sort of thematically matched the tone of what I was writing. And I'd say lately, I prefer to work in silence. So I turn off, when I'm writing, when I'm sitting down and working on a script, I turn off any distractions. I don't have any music playing. Even if I've got a load of wash in the washing machine down the hall, I'll shut the bathroom door so I don't hear that noise. And I'll really focus on the work. I'll focus on my laptop. I work on just your standard laptop. Do I have any other rituals to get into the zone? I really don't. There's nothing lucky that I do. I know all those great sports rituals and things you're supposed to do or avoid. But I don't think I have any. I do when I'm done. And this is not an original thing by any means. But I'm a fan of good Scotch whiskey. And when I'm done with a script, I will pour myself a small glass of really good Scotch, and I'll enjoy that and just sit pleased with myself until it's time to move on to the next thing.
So when you're working in like a licensed property versus something where you're creating a story from whole cloth,
Mm-hmm.
I imagine the skill set of world building is different. But how so? How does it change the way you create the story?
Well, with a licensed property, the world has already been built for us, for the writer. With Batman, there's, now, what is it, 80 years of Gotham City, and the DC universe. And it's all there, and it's a very rich history, and there are books about it, and lots and lots of books about it, a few of which I own. And I would rely on that history to help me with the rules of the world. Everything from geography to what do the police officers wear, and what do they drive, and what does the Gotham Central Police Station look like, which, by the way, is one of my favorite buildings in Gotham City, the very 19th century facade to the GCPD. With Strawberry Shortcake, it was funny. When I took that gig, it was, my daughter was 9 at the time, and I wanted to write something with her. That was the only reason I took the Strawberry Shortcake gig. I wanted to do something with my child. And when I got the assignments, we sat down and watched all of the Strawberry Shortcake cartoon that was on TV at the time. I think it was on Bubbly. We got the DVDs from the library, and watched them all, and literally drew a map of Strawberry Shortcake's neighborhood. We wanted to know which house was next to which house, where the businesses were. Was there a fountain? Were there bridges? All of those things that really I doubt anybody had done before. We wanted to know exactly what the town looked like. And that helped with the world building, and helped give that neighborhood, that little village, as silly and make-believe as it was, it helped give it some reality and make it real for us. So all of that material was out there, both for Batman, for Strawberry Shortcake. I did a Shrek story, and that world too had, the fabric of the world had already been built by somebody else. For creator-owned, we really, as writers and as artists too, we have to start from scratch. As you said, we're building it whole cloth, and it starts much smaller. I've never been one of those writers who sits down to write a Bible before they start on a script. I've never done that. I've never planned out what a city looks like or what the rules are. The rules are what I need them to be as the story develops, and then the story has to follow those rules. So there are science fiction stories that I've done that weren't at all reality based, but still, as I'm setting up the rules for the story within the story, one of the science fiction stories I wrote takes place on a far off world populated by all kinds of aliens and humans, and there's a bar on this planet, and in the back room of the bar there's a poker game happening. Poker, as it turns out, is a universal game. Aliens love to play it too. And there are humans and aliens and even robots involved in this poker game. And that meant that it was an oxygen-based system. Nobody was wearing helmets. Nobody was wearing, those big NASA-type space helmets to have oxygen. Everybody there was breathing oxygen, including the humans in the game. It was a game or a world where poker existed. So there had to be human influence on the world. If poker existed, there have to be other aspects of human society in this world. One of them was bartenders. There's a bartender who was serving drinks. There was a cocktail waitress. But there were things that were very, very alien too, and they helped shape the reality of this world. Are there cars? Are there flying cars? All those things, all those decisions had to come into play and help shape the geography and the society of the world in which this story was happening. But what's different is you get to invent it yourself.
Nice. Nice. And that's some class A parenting right there. The strawberry shortcake story. That is awesome.
Thank you. At the time, they were the youngest writer working in comics. Alex had 2 bylines with me, and at 9 years old was a published writer in comics. Did signings with me. She went to cons with me.
That is so
it was
cool.
Yeah, it was really cool.
So, what makes for good comic book storytelling, in your opinion?
Well, visuals that match the story, visuals that match the tone of the script, I think are very, very important. It is a visual medium. A script is not a comic book. A script is a component of a comic book. And the visuals have to match the story. Now, you can tell a horror story using cartoony art. It's been done many, many times. You can tell a serious story or a dramatic story using art that doesn't quite match the traditional theme or traditionally match the theme of your story. But the end result, they have to work hand in hand. So having an art team that understands what the story is about and being able to portray that story sequentially is, I think, essential. That's the most important thing, is to have visuals that match the story, that effectively tell the story, and that bring the reader from panel 1 to panel 2, from page 1 to page 2 to page 3 to page 4, to have that great exciting, I should say, moment in the lower right-hand corner of the right-hand page that makes you want to turn the page. Those are all really important elements of good storytelling. But I want when I'm reading a comic, I want a story that grabs me too. I want tight dialogue. I go back and look at the stories that I read as a kid, the comics that I read as a kid, and boy, were some of them dialogue heavy. Especially the Marvel books of the 1980s.
I think that's actually one of the biggest changes to the medium, probably in the last 30 years. Is you go and you read Sandman, and it is a dense volume. You read any of the superhero comics, like Captain America of the 1980s, and he basically Steve Rogers just mansplains the whole book away.
I think you're right, and that was a lot of that was Jim Shooter's doing. The editor-in-chief of Marvel. There had to be a lot of expositionary dialogue at the beginning of every book back then. I was a big X-Men fan, and every time Wolverine appeared in a comic book, he had to tell everybody, "I'm the best there is at what I do, and what I do isn't very nice." And he had to explain, that his bones are made of adamantium, and that he has these claws, and it gets very tiresome. If you're sitting down and reading a number of issues at once, it can be very, very tiresome. And that amount of text can really weigh down a work in a way that isn't necessary. On the other hand, you mentioned Sandman. And to me, as text heavy as Sandman was, I think it's perfect. Alan Moore's Swamp Thing was the same way, and I don't think it's an accident that these are both horror books. And Sandman, to me, at its heart, at the very beginning, was a horror book. Alan and Neil both set the stage so beautifully with the words they chose to use, both for dialogue and for exposition. And that text really helped paint a picture of what was going on, and it helped create the mood. But I go back and read again, those X-Men books from from the late 70s, early 80s, the Spider-Man books that were in my collection from that era. And boy, there's a lot of dialogue. I mean, it's balloon after balloon. It's caption after caption. And it makes it hard to really enjoy the artwork and enjoy the story. What's different now is that you've got a lot less dialogue. You don't have thought balloons anymore. You've got a lot less dialogue. You've got much fewer captioning going on and fewer panels per page too. The number of panels per page has dropped dramatically. The average in the books that I do is about 5. Typical comic that I write, there are 5 panels per page on average. When I was growing up, I would say the average was 7 or 8. It was much higher. They were cramming a lot more onto each page. And now the panels stand on their own a lot better, I think, and the stories flow a lot better because the panels have room to breathe.
Does working on comics and creating comics change the way you experience comics as a fan?
It has. It absolutely has. It's funny. I was just talking with somebody about this. I really didn't pay attention to coloring until I started making comics. I didn't pay attention to lettering until I started making comics. And that lettering and coloring both matter. When I was a kid, I would look at a book and something about the coloring would be off. And I just registered that, boy, the coloring's a little off. And it would take me out of the story, which I always hate when I'm watching a movie or a TV show and there's something that incidentally just snapped you out of the story and you realize I'm watching a TV show or I'm watching a movie as opposed to being immersed in that world. You want the audience member to be immersed in the world, right? And there was something every once in a while about a comic book that pulled me out of that world. And very often it was the coloring or the lettering. I couldn't, I didn't know this at the time, but the letterer had jammed too many words in the balloon or had arranged the words in the balloon in such a way that a sentence looked disjointed. Or, and this has always been a pet peeve of mine, and I know there are Thor fans who will argue with me about this, but using Old English fonts for Thor's lettering drives me crazy. Because in a comic book, they can be difficult to read. It's a very small point size. And if you're poorly using, I should say, if you're not doing it well, if you're poorly using an Old English style font, the text can be hard to read. And I know there were some Avengers books that I read as a kid where I just glossed over whatever it was Thor had to say because I didn't dig the lettering. But I didn't know anything about lettering. I didn't know that lettering was done by hand.
I'm sorry. It's interesting. I was just thinking about there was this one Avengers book. I don't remember which one it was, but it came out in 1988. And this was back with the old analog process where they would do the coloring, but then they wouldn't use the coloring. Instead, they would do this paint by numbers thing against the coloring. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they would make really weird mistakes with it. For example, there was this one panel where you had Thor and Captain America, and Captain America, his skin was exposed on the legs. And on Thor, where in that particular era, Thor was supposed to have the skin on his legs, he was wearing the blue pants. It takes you right out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There were coloring mistakes. The ones that jump out at me, the ones that I still remember, in the original Wolverine miniseries, the Claremont and Miller 4-issue miniseries, there were swatches of blue that were just splashed onto swatches of black, or vice versa. It was either blue on black or black on blue. And it just made the image very, very muddy, and it was obvious. And when they finally recolored the book and re-released it as a deluxe hardcover, I snatched it up because the coloring had been fixed, and was so relieved to see better coloring on this story that I really, really love. I learned, once I became a comic book creator, the skills that are required for coloring, the skills that are required for lettering, and how a top-notch letterer, Richard Starkings being one of my favorites, Clem Robbins being another, how a top-notch letterer can make an A book into an A-plus book. How a really good colorist can do the same. And how, unfortunately, how a bad colorist can ruin a book, or a letterer who isn't as skilled as others. How a sloppy tail on a word balloon can ruin the reading experience. A poorly drawn tail or a poorly drawn word balloon. It's just an oval, right? But boy, if it's sloppily drawn, if it looks like it was rushed, it'll hurt the reading experience. And those were things that I learned once I became a creator. In my early days, when I was still pitching to DC before I had the first book there, I read everything I could about the craft of making comics, and it wasn't just writing comics, but the other elements as well, the other aspects of the job. And I read the DC Comics Guide to Script Writing, the DC Comics Guide to Penciling Comics, the DC Comics Guide to Coloring and Lettering Comics, which I believe were in the same volume. And those were all incredibly valuable books. Even though I wasn't ever going to be doing coloring or lettering, I wanted to know how those professionals did the job and to understand the process. Particularly at that point, again, this was the early 2000s, as those tasks were becoming more and more digital. I wanted to understand the limitations of the job, what was required, what I needed to do as a writer to get the best out of a penciler, an inker, a colorist, a letterer. I wanted to make their jobs as easy as possible. And doing research on how each of those professionals do their job really changed both the creative process for me and also the audience experience.
You start a new project. It's a totally new universe. You have new characters to play with. Where do they find their voices? How do you get there?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. Excuse the silence as I think about that. Let's use the Hardways as a good example, since that's the thing that's on my plate right now. The Hardways is a 5-issue miniseries that we're self-publishing that Sean and I are self-publishing. Sean Richardson is the penciler and my creative partner. We're self-publishing it through our own Double Down Comics imprint. And the Hardways started with a nugget of an idea about a kidnapping in Las Vegas. And we knew that the story was going to be about this guy, the kidnapped victim, whose name is Maury. And how did Maury the concept become Maury the character? It was really through dialogue and through his actions as I'm scripting the story, how he threw his dice. The story starts in a casino and he's playing craps. He's the shooter, he's got the dice, and he's playing craps. And what he says, how he places a bet, how he interacts with the people around him, all of that starts to build his character. And what he wears, even, I'm getting a picture as I'm writing of what he's wearing. How tall is he? What does he look like? Is he George Clooney handsome, or is he kind of schlubby? And how he moves through the casino and moves through the story panel by panel helps shape who he is. And we got to a point where the first issue was done. The script of the first issue was done, and I sent it on to Sean to read it. And he said he got a picture of Maury as a guy who wears expensive clothes but doesn't know well enough to iron them. And I thought that was an incredible description. And that's exactly who he was. You know, he's a whale. He's a big ticket gambler. You know, he's a high limit gambler. And he throws money around like it's nothing. And he wears expensive clothes, but they're not ironed. And he's a bit of a mess. He's a bit of a schlub. And having that description from Sean helped shape the rest of the story. Knowing there are other characters, of course, in the story, and hearing Sean's take on who they were and what their motivations might be really helped shape their dialogue and shape their actions in the particular story. Maury is a guy who, you know, he's kidnapped 3/4 of the way through book 1. And he gets through the kidnapping, at least the early stages of the kidnapping, by telling jokes. And a lot of it is self-deprecating because that's his defense mechanism. And it's partially because that's my defense mechanism. When I'm stressed out or when I'm in a stressful situation, sometimes I make jokes. And it's just who I am. And it seemed to fit that character as well. And for some people who interact with him, they might think it's funny. For other characters who interact with him, one of the kidnappers especially, it's an annoying personality trait. And this other kidnapper quickly becomes the antagonist of the story, the lead antagonist of the story, because he just can't stand Maury and can't stand being around him and can't stand his personality. So that helps shape who this kidnapper's name is, Dave. That helps shape who Dave is and what kind of guy would bristle at this kind of humor, who also would stage a kidnapping, who also is in hock for $300,000. And all of those factors help shape the characters and help give them voices. There are other characters in the Hardways who are based on people I know. The casino manager is named Cheryl Dolly in the Hardways. And Cheryl is one of my oldest friends. She was a fellow student at Northwestern University with me, and we worked at the student newspaper together, and we had our first internship together at the same newspaper. And Cheryl and I are very good friends. And I needed a tough woman to be the casino manager. And the first person I thought of was Cheryl. And I sent her a message or an email and asked if it was okay if I named this character after her and used a little bit of her personality. And fortunately, she said yes.
That's awesome.
Thank you. And there are other characters like that. I do that a lot, whether it's a supporting character or sometimes even a lead character. I may lean on people I know to help shape the personalities or shape the appearances of the characters in my stories.
How do you approach inclusion when you write?
That's really interesting and something I think about a lot more now than I used to. Without getting too personal, I am a white, Jewish, heterosexual, middle-class American. That is the world in which I live, right? Those are my experiences. I'm a professional writer. I trying to think of other elements who make me who I am. Those are many of the elements that make me who I am. I have friends who are not white, Jewish, heterosexual, suburbanite, middle-class residents. I have friends who, and coworkers and peers in a number of industries, people who I encounter who do not fit those demographics. And it's really important to not just have white males in your stories these days. It was a joke when I was growing up that, everybody in Star Wars is white. And it's true. I mean, it was a big joke in Chasing Amy. Everybody in Star Wars is white. It's ridiculous. And that wouldn't be the case today. And certainly you see it in the sequels. It is a much different demographic cast. It's a much different. It's a much diverse cast.
Does Darth Vader count though? Because he was kind of purple. I mean, when he took the mask off.
But as I said in Chasing Amy, he was a crusty old white man, right?
That's true.
When they took the mask off, and I do think about that. I've spoken to my artists, I'd say much more over the last 4 or 5 years than early on. Early on, I didn't pay attention to it at all. But over the last 4 or 5 years, I've said, hey, if you can make a character of color, then please do so. If there's an opportunity for that, if there's a scene where you see a lot of people, make sure to put people of color in the background. And that goes for ability too. If there's an opportunity to put somebody who is disabled or somebody who is Hispanic or because this is a visual medium, okay? Somebody who looks different than you or I. I'm talking to my penciler. If there's an opportunity to put somebody who looks different in the story, please do so. And that's an important step towards inclusion because you want audience members, you want your readers to feel comfortable reading those stories. Sean made one of the kidnappers in the Hardways. And we never discussed this beforehand, but he made one of the kidnappers in the Hardways African American, and he's even drawn and colored in such a way that he looks to be a blend of African American and Hispanic, as if he had parents from the two different cultures. And I think that was a terrific decision. It wasn't anything that was explicitly mentioned in my script, but it was something that Sean and the colorist, a terrific artist named Juan Ramira, worked on themselves and brought to the story. And I thought it was great because I don't want to write stories that are just populated by white people. Stories shouldn't be told that way anymore. As far as gender inclusion, or sexuality and gender and sexuality, of course, being two different things. I don't write a lot of stories with sex. I have in the past done a couple stories with sex scenes. But sexuality generally isn't a big issue for me. That being said, one of the supporting protagonists in my miniseries Old Wounds was a lesbian. You wouldn't know it from her actions in the story, but I knew she was a lesbian. But she just didn't have a romantic scene in the book. There was no mention of her girlfriend. There was no mention, or wife, I don't know. I didn't develop that, but I just knew that she was a lesbian, and if there was an opportunity to portray that, I would have. It was just something that I knew about her as I was writing her. And that, I got to think when I wrote Old Wounds, I wrote that in 2009 or 2010, if I've got to think back. Today, if I were writing that today, I would try a little bit harder to not put it on display, but to make sure that that was clear to everybody. Because again, I think it's important to be inclusive in comics and to show different perspectives and different points of view, different cultures, that we're not all just white, middle-aged suburbanites.
That makes a ton of sense. Do you have a favorite type of story to tell?
Right now, I'm really enjoying crime stories. Do you mean it like as a genre?
Just in general. It could mean anything.
I'm really enjoying crime stories. I've always been a crime fiction fan. I mean, going back to the first books that I read, which were first comic books I read were Batman. The very first superhero book that I owned was a Batman comic, and I still own it. And it was a mystery. It was a mystery. Batman was trying to get to the root of the mystery. I was a Sherlock Holmes fan. I read Hardy Boys. I read Encyclopedia Brown. I loved mysteries, and that changed as I got older to include the works of Cherokee Paul McDonald and Elmore Leonard. And boy, if there's a caper movie out, I want to go see it. If there's a heist movie, I want to go see it. I just love that type of fiction. And I really like writing it too. And some of my friends have said, that I should have been writing crime fiction all along, that it's just so natural for me. I've dabbled in horror, and I think I've written some tight and really successful horror stories. I've done a little bit of science fiction, but really they've been other genre stories that happen to be in a science fiction milieu. There happen to be spaceships in them. There happen to be aliens, but they're really other stories. The poker story that I was telling you about earlier is called Busted, and it's a self-published piece that actually Sean Richardson drew. And it takes place on this, far off world, far, far away. So by nature, it's science fiction, but it's really a caper story. It's a science fiction crime story. And at its heart, it's more like The Sting than it is more like Star Wars. I've done kids comics to a varying degree of success. Some of them have worked, some of them haven't. But I liked writing for young audiences. I thought it was a fun challenge. And I would do so again if the right opportunity came up. But right now, I really dig being a crime writer.
So, do you have a favorite single issue story or title of all time?
So, I have a favorite single issue story or title of the books that I've read. I've got to think about that. I'm going to think. I'll tell you, I'm sitting in my dining room right now, looking at a bookshelf of graphic novels, knowing that there's a bookshelf of graphic novels in my bedroom, and in my closet are shelves full of short boxes filled with comics. So there's thousands of books, probably thousands of books that I've now got to think about. And do I have a favorite of those? And the first one that comes to mind, this is a pretty good one. The first one that comes to mind is Identity Crisis, the miniseries that was collected into a graphic novel by Rags Morales and Brad Meltzer.
Nice.
Not only is Rags' artwork in that just absolutely stunning, but it's one of my favorite superhero stories and one of my favorite mysteries. Brad being Brad, does mysteries. He does whodunits, whether it's in a superhero universe or in a political universe, like so many of his novels. And Identity Crisis just absolutely grabbed me. And there are emotional beats in that story that get me every time I reread it. It's not often I'm so emotionally moved by a comic book that I cry when reading it. I can only think of a few times where that's happened.
That's actually the next question.
Really?
I was going to ask you, when was the last time a comic book made you cry?
Wow. Okay. And I know exactly what it was. But Identity Crisis was one of those moments.
Nice.
And I was just talking to Brad and Jimmy Palmati about this on Twitter. There's a moment in. Have you read Identity Crisis? Do you know the story?
No, I don't.
Okay. There's a moment where, and I won't spoil too much here. There's a moment where Tim Drake has stripped out of most of his Robin costume, and is huddled like a child in Batman's arms. And Tim is crying, and Batman is trying to emotionally support him, which is not an easy task for Batman. Something terrible has happened to Tim, and he has just lost it. He's completely, he's lost it. He's hysterical. He's crying and crying. He's bawling, and Batman is holding him. And these two orphans, well, I've given it away, haven't I? Someone has killed Tim's father, and Tim has come across the body. Batman and Robin have come across the body. And these two orphans now only have each other. And the first time I read it, I just started crying. And it's a beautiful splash page that I love so much. I've paid homage to it in 2 of my comic books. There's a scene in Old Wounds that reproduces that image, but starring my characters. And the moment is reproduced by Brad Walker and Jimmy Palmati in my debut comic in Batman Allied Secret Files in 2005. I just absolutely love that image of Batman cradling Tim. And Brad owns the original artwork for that page. Jimmy had asked on Twitter recently, if you've got millions of dollars and could buy any artwork in comics, what would you buy? And for me, it would be that page. I know Brad would never part with it, but for me, it would be that page because it's such a striking image and so emotional. The last comic book that made me cry was 4 kids who walk into a bank, or 4 kids walk into a bank. And I won't tell you why. I don't want to spoil anything. But it's an incredible miniseries that everybody should read. And it looks silly, and most of it is silly. But there is a very emotional climax to the story, and it was surprising when it happened, and I just started bawling.
So, is there anybody that strikes you as either the most inspiring or underrated creator in comics?
Boy, those are 2 very different things.
Mm-hmm.
Underrated, I don't know, because you don't want to. I wouldn't want to leave anybody out. There's certainly a ton of creators who are not getting the due that somebody might think they should. So I don't know, and I don't want to rate or rank people either. But I can talk about inspiring. And the person who immediately comes to mind is Jimmy Palmati, who is inspiring both in the quality of his writing and in the quality of his artwork, but also in his attitude. He's very active on Twitter, And I've known Jimmy since long before I got into comics as a professional. He was one of the first comic book creators that I interviewed. Back when Marvel Knights had launched and he was inking Daredevil, Kevin Smith was writing it at that time. Joe Quesada was penciling it. I interviewed the three of them and started a professional relationship that became a friendship, which is wonderful with Jimmy. And he is such an incredibly nice guy and so inspiring and so encouraging that he took the time when I was first trying to break into comics to coach me and to answer some questions about the process and to give me help when I needed it. Even though we weren't working together, I'd ask him questions and he'd answer them. He took the time to answer them. And then later when we became peers in the industry, and I use that term very loosely for myself because I know what my role is in the comic book industry. I'm a Z-list creator. I make comics that most comic book readers don't read.
I don't know if that's fair, though.
Well, maybe I'm being overly modest, but I am by no means at the apex of the industry like a Jimmy Palmati is. Despite that professional disparity, the professional success, Jimmy treats me and every other pro he talks with an incredible amount of respect. And he's encouraging on Twitter and is upbeat. Excuse me, even on things that have nothing to do with comics. He's very upbeat and is rarely ever negative. And talks about his experience with fans in glowing terms. And he promotes his work and his wife Amanda's work positively, and it makes you root for him. And to me, that's very inspiring and very encouraging. Jimmy is also an incredible success story in the area of self-published comics. He had all the success doing work for Marvel and DC and Event Comics when he was with working with Joe on that, and now he self-publishes everything, and it's to watch his success and to see how he's doing it really creates a template for people like me in the industry. And that's professionally inspiring.
Awesome. Well, Russell, it looks like we're up against the end of the show. Are you ready for the fun part?
This has all been fun, so I can't imagine there's anything more fun coming.
Oh yeah, these are awesome. These are the closing questions.
Lay them on me.
All right. So, is there a particular Ninja Turtle that you see yourself as?
All right, I'm going to have to make a confession. I'm not a Ninja Turtle fan.
Oh no!
I'm sorry. I don't know if that's going to cause you to delete the interview and curse my name. I never got into the Ninja Turtles. I was a little too old for that. And it's just never been anything that appealed to me. I'm sure they're wonderful. Ninja Turtle fans are fantastic, but it's just not my thing.
That's cool. So, if you were making a Batman-style utility belt for yourself in your own life, what would be in it?
Oh, that's easy. I'm thinking of the things that are in my messenger bag that I carry with me to every convention. There's a multi-tool, which one of those things that folds up real tiny, but you open it up like a Swiss Army knife, and it's got knives and a screwdriver and a little saw and all those really cool tools. I love my multi-tool. So there'd be a multi-tool in one pouch. I'd have a square reader for sure, because I got to sell those comics, right? and I need something to sell comics. And of course, a little pouch for my cell phone. I'd have pens, lots and lots of pens, because you can never have too many pens when you're a writer. There'd be ballpoints, there'd be ink pens, maybe a fountain pen or two, a lot of Sharpies, because boy, we go through Sharpies. There'd be a pouch for business cards. There'd be, this is embarrassing. There'd be a pouch for Band-Aids. Because I don't want to say that I'm clumsy, but it sure looks that way.
Oh my God, no, I totally understand that. You don't have to explain it.
I am, you know how on the original WKRP in Cincinnati, Les Nessman always had a Band-Aid? Somewhere in his body, he always had a Band-Aid or a bandage.
Yeah.
Most days of my life, I've got a Band-Aid somewhere because I've stubbed a toe and broken a nail, or cut a finger while I was cooking. I love to cook. And my fingers have tasted chef's blade from time to time. So there would be a pouch with Band-Aids and Neosporin for sure. What else? What else would I have in a utility belt? Knockout gas, I think, would be good. You know how Batman's got those tiny little ball grenades that are smoke bombs or knockout gas, and he can make a quick exit that way.
But do you have like a huge use for that in your own life? I mean, are you routinely using knockout gas on people?
I would if I had them. Oh boy, if I had access to smoke bombs and knockout gas and could disappear like that, using a rebreather, of course, which would also have to be in my utility belt. I would have those in a heartbeat. The fan at a convention, who corners you as you're leaving a bathroom and wants to talk to you about how you ruined Batgirl, which I swear to God has happened. I was blamed at a convention twice for paralyzing Batgirl, despite the fact that I'm not Alan Moore and that I was 15 when The Killing Joke came out. Twice in the same panel was blamed for paralyzing Barbara Gordon. Yes. Do I wish that I had some explosive pellets and could have disappeared from that room? Yes, I do. What else? What else would be good? There's got to be something right by my back. A grapnel would be good. You know, Batman's grapnel. That would be excellent to help make a quick escape. And I hate stairs too, so a grapnel would be excellent to get up to a higher floor of a building. And I suppose a remote control for the Batmobile.
There you go.
Got to have one of those.
So what inspires you?
What inspires me, personally or professionally?
Either one.
Either one. My friends inspire me. They really do, in and out of comics. I think I have surrounded myself with really good people who are funny, who, for the most part, are smarter than I am. I like that in friends. I like surrounding myself with people who are smarter than I am, people who I can learn from, people who are different than I am. I have friends who, boy, we talk comics day in and day out, and we talk signings and cons and movies and all that nerdy fandom stuff. But I've got a lot of other friends who don't have anything to do with comics, and I can talk politics with them, or poker, or Vegas, or cooking. I mentioned that I like to cook, and I learn from them. My friends really inspire me, and I think that's really important. You shouldn't feel, if you feel like you're the most important person in the room and the smartest person in the room all the time, I think you need to reevaluate your life and reevaluate the people you surround yourselves with, because you might just be surrounding yourself with acolytes, yes men, and you're not going to get honesty out of that. You're not going to get inspiration. You're not going to become a better person, a better you, if all you do is surround yourself with yes men.
This might actually be redundant, the way you answered that last question, but I'll ask it anyway.
Sure.
What criteria do you look for in a sidekick or minion?
Well, a minion would have to be a yes man. A minion is going to do my bidding. A minion is unquestionably going to do what I tell them. And that's
what you're paying them for,
Right. And when I slap them around a little bit, they're going to take it. They are peons, and they're here to do my bidding. I'm thinking particularly of the minions in the Batman 66 show. Joker would always have his goofily dressed minions. All the villains would,
and it was all the same guys. It was always like the same 5 extras.
Oh yeah, totally. And they're just, nameless thugs. Nameless thug number 1, nameless thug number 2.
Exactly.
Servants, and that's what I'm looking for. In a sidekick, that's really interesting. And I'm going to make a confession. There's a great line in The West Wing, which I quote from regularly. I would think The West Wing and The Wire are the 2 television shows I quote from the most. There's a great quote in The West Wing where President Bartlett is talking to Josh, the deputy chief of staff, and the president says, the difference between me and you? I want to be the guy, and you want to be the guy counts on. And Josh understands, because he's right. Josh doesn't want the power. Josh doesn't want to be in charge. He wants to be the guy that the guy counts on. And my confession is that I'm Josh in that regard. I'm not the hero. I'm the sidekick. I want to be the guy counts on. And that has been the case. I would bet most of my life that I don't have the, what do they call it in the wild? The alpha male quality that makes you king of the herd, right? I'm not the alpha male, and I'm okay with that. I've never been the alpha male. I've never been the hero. I've never been Batman. But I would make an excellent Alfred. I'm the guy counts on.
Nice.
So in this scenario, I'd have to say I'm the sidekick. I'm the Alfred. I'm not Robin. I'm not putting on the green booties and the tiny green shorts
and attracting all the gunfire.
Yeah, nobody needs to see that, and I'm too smart to be Robin the boy hostage. But I'm Watson to Holmes for sure. You look at the West Wing cast, and I think people would probably say I'm Toby. I don't know if you're a West Wing fan or not, but people would look at me and my demeanor and say I'm Toby. I would like to think that I'm trying to be Josh.
So where do you find joy
in life? Well, a good comic book, of course.
Nice.
I still love reading, and my opportunities for just sitting down for a couple hours and reading are not what they used to be, because of adult responsibilities and being a parent and all of that, and having an exhausting day job. But where do I find joy? Reading a good comic book, seeing a movie with a good friend, playing poker. I'd say a better than average poker player, and I do love playing poker. I love cooking. Cooking is probably my main creative outlet now, because what had been a hobby, writing comics, is is now a second job. I enjoy cooking. Those are the things that bring me joy. Here's one. This is interesting. This is something that brings me absolute bliss. Having cooked for somebody and watching them eat and enjoy it.
Nice.
Is to me an incredibly joyful experience.
It's the Yiddish mama in you.
Yeah, that might be. Is it good? Is it good? Do you like it? Do you want more?
I'm the same way.
I think that's a bit of my grandmother coming in for sure. How do you like it? Is it good? There's joy in bringing other people happiness, and the act of cooking for somebody, the act of fulfilling somebody else's needs is fun and enjoyable for me.
Congratulations. You've just defeated Thanos. You now have the Infinity Gauntlet and the power to warp any aspect of reality that you choose. What's that item, that first thing at the tippy top of your list that you would do with it?
What's the first thing I could do if I could warp reality? Mm-hmm. Shed some pounds. I think I'd shed some pounds. I wouldn't go full Brad Pitt. I wouldn't want to blow into anybody's mind. But getting rid of some of this middle-aged girth would be a good start.
Yeah, I know the feeling. So what's next for Russell Lissau?
Well, in November, we should be seeing release of the Hardways #3 by me, Sean Richardson, and the rest of our creative team. And that'll be coming out on Comixology, as well as from our individual stores. And that story's heating up. That's issue 3 of 5. And hopefully we're going to get the Hardways back on a regular release schedule, probably quarterly, until all 5 issues are done. After that, I will hopefully have one more long-form miniseries or graphic novel coming out, something I'm tentatively calling Saving Grace. The script for that is done, but we haven't moved forward with an art team yet. But I've spoken to some people and I've got that in mind. But right now I'm focused on the Hardways and bringing people to my little dark, crime-infested corner of Las Vegas.
Russell, I wanted to thank you for making the time to visit me on my humble little podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure to talk with you.
Awesome. So where can people find you online?
Okay, they can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Russell_Lissau. That's RUSSELL Lissau, LISSAU. Very creatively named, I think. I have an online store where you can find my stuff, and that's Russell-Lissau.square.site. On Twitter, I'm at @RLissau, my first initial and then my last name. So it's at RLISSAU. And the same place on Instagram, although I don't use Instagram quite as much as I used to, but you can find me on Insta also at @RLissau.
And now it's time to go. Wasn't that fun? The Panel Garden is a show about the things we love. It's produced and hosted by the adorable Eva Webb. Opening theme by Antonia Marquis and Tyler Scott. Closing theme by Mikey Flash of Speed Force Music. The credits are read by the awesome and talented Kat Bertano. That's me. And if you're feeling super generous, feel free to go to buymeacoffee.com/EvaIsAdorable. There, you can support what we do by chipping in as little as $1. Not financially able? That's okay. Shares on social media and reviews on your favorite podcast listening platforms help us a ton. And that's it, babies. That's all we got. Thank you for being awesome, valid, and perfectly gorgeous. We couldn't do this show without the love and support of the amazing people who listen. That's you. Join us next time for another death-defying adventure in cyberspace. Bye!